Oh man, CNN's Michael Smerconish recently went on a COVID harangue that saw him focus on a combination of political and corporate power as a good mix to achieve his herd immunity goal. That combination is called fascism, Michael. I have some questions for you about that, and I have some questions about why you try to indict average Americans who don't want the jab. Hi folks, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. Here's the story. On Saturday, May 1st, CNN's Michael Smerconish took to the airwaves to deliver, and CNN soon tweeted a COVID harangue that began with him claiming that we are struggling to reach herd immunity against COVID-19, and saw him hint that a combination of political and corporate power might be a good mix to achieve his immunity goal. Yes, Mr. Smerconish, that is called fascism. You can see a documentary on it that the MRC just released as part of our free learning series, College Unbound. Now, after noting that supply far outstrips demand for the government-funded, government-delivered, government-protected from liability, so-called vaccines, Smerconish piously went on to imply that correlation is causation by citing a CNN poll.
A new CNN poll maybe tells us why. 26% of Americans say they will not get the vaccine. And among Republicans, that number is 44%. That's scary. Those folks jeopardize our ability to get to herd immunity faster.
So let's study his statement and ask some questions. When Smerconish says of Americans, why doesn't he say of Americans polled and tell us the size, demographics, and political makeup of the survey sample? When Smerconish says, quote, will not get the vaccine, end quote, what does he mean by that? Does he mean a single, real vaccine? If so, why doesn't he mention its name and maker? Real vaccines induce antibody responses that are capable of offering long-term protection against destructive viruses. Does Smerconish erroneously mean to apply the term vaccine to a number of experimental mRNA injections that were never put through the required long-term trials to receive approval for normal use by his vaunted FDA, but which instead were only given emergency use authorization? When he says get to herd immunity faster, how does he claim to make the mental leap from mRNA injections that do not necessarily confer immunity, but instead are claimed to reduce the severity of COVID-19 to actual herd immunity? Don't bother looking for Smerconish's answers. He then played a clip from a small number of cameralicious GOP senators and congressmen who once worked in the medical field and now, as a group called the Congressional Doctors Caucus, are telling people they can regain freedom if they accept this, quote, vaccine, end quote. Curiously, none of those thrilling politicians mentioned their oaths to the U.S. Constitution, nor did they answer any of the questions we noted earlier. Then, after a little limp pandering to left feminism, mentioning that when El Presidente Joe Biden gave his address to a joint session of Congress last week and stood before two women,
we saw a historic image of the president delivering an address to Congress backed by two women, Vice President Kamala Harris and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Smerconish said that Joe Biden should have used his opportunity to enter the room maskless.
The president could have entered unmasked into a room packed with vaccinated lawmakers, also unmasked, and touted it as a return to normal,
sending a message that once you get the magic vaccine, you can be free to enjoy a normal life.
In that camera frame, as President Biden spoke, Harris and Pelosi kept their masks in place, despite the fact that all three have been fully vaccinated.
Smerconish chose to keep pushing the show people they can be free by getting the jab, i.e., they will not be free if they don't get the jab narrative. Citing former Planned Parenthood president, now CNN medical analyst, wink wink, Leana Wen's recent op-ed for the Washington Post.
Imagine if Wednesday's joint session had required that all attendees be fully vaccinated. Those who were not vaccinated were not welcome, but those permitted in could walk into the room, take off their mask, sit next to one another, and listen to a presidential address just as they did in 2019.
If there's any reason to get vaccinated, it's so you can watch Joe Biden speak. Yeah, that's what I would do. Evidently, it never crossed Smerconish's or Wen's jabtastic minds that a joint session of Congress means it's in session, and elected representatives and senators are constitutionally assured they can attend unless they've been arrested and imprisoned for committing crimes. You can think about that a little bit. And after more claims that the unjabbed will prevent swift herd immunity, even though these jabs won't make people immune, Smerconish gets to his real point.
There's also the stick, which could be wielded by government and the private sector. Businesses have particular leverage as they can require employees to get vaccinations and restrict public access to private spaces like airlines, mass transit, most sporting and cultural venues, restaurants, and movie theaters.
In other words, to Smerconish, fascism seems like a pretty good idea. As I've mentioned at MRC-TV, fascism is, strictly speaking, a form of state collectivism, which allows the nominal, in name only, ownership of a business that's actually run or regulated by government. The businesses Smerconish mentioned earlier are not only regulated by government, most are licensed to operate, i.e., only allowed to be open when government says so. Airlines have been an arm of the federal government for decades, going all the way back to the federal creation of air routes, the FAA, and federal subsidies and regulations applied to airports. Restaurants are licensed by their respective cities and states, contrary to the contract clause of the U.S. Constitution. And nearly all of the businesses Smerconish mentioned already have been smashed by government lockdowns and COVID mandates under threats of license revocation, fines, and arrests. Does Smerconish really think that they would not act out of fear of government retribution? And does he really think that employers who have standing contracts with workers can see themselves suddenly break those contracts, demanding employee vaccinations without legal consequences? Do you think that those rural Americans you deride, those people who would prefer to be left alone, who understand the concepts of private property and free association and free will, who know that the survivability rate of this so-called pandemic is 99.97% and that the risk of asymptomatic spread is near zero, do you think that they might have reasons you never considered for avoiding this government-funded jab? And one last question, Michael. After your conceited and arrogant display of such towering ignorance about even the most fundamental questions many of the people you mock might have, is there any reason anyone should bother listening to you? Hey, thanks so much for watching, everybody. Really appreciate it. Remember, if you get the opportunity, please like and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, find all of our videos at Rumble. Yeah, they're all housed over there. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as well. And you can find the team at MRCTV.org. That's MRCTV.org. For MRC-TV, again, thank you. Keep fighting for freedom and common sense. I'm Gardner Goldsmith.